Good morning to most. Good afternoon to the viewing audience across the pond. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to our fifth episode of What Fresh Hell, a new limited run show we're doing where Deep State Kuba gives you updates on the geopolitical situation as we all prepare for World War III. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, I want to say thank you guys for movie night last night. We watched 1989's Chameleon Street. If you are new to the channel, welcome. I hope you enjoy what you see. If you do, please hit like and subscribe. It's a passive gesture that goes a very long way in promoting the channel. For viewers of the main show, we will be back tomorrow morning at our usual time at 9 a.m. Pacific, where MT will be hosting another episode of our Love on the Left series. This time with an all-female power panel. So that means I won't be there. Day off. Now, if you enjoy all of the diverse programming we provide here on TIR and you would like to join us for our raucous champagne rooms and movie nights, then consider becoming a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber for as little as $3 a month or a one-time payment of $30 for the year. Your small donation goes a long way in making sure that TIR can continue to stay on the air. Now, what fresh hell have we got going on already? The Trump administration has cited various war objectives, including degrading Iran's missile capabilities and its nuclear program. Killing senior leaders has also been a priority for the U.S. and Israel. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Thursday implied that more leaders could be targeted, referring specifically to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Bazi Force, a powerful internal security unit whose leader was killed by Israel earlier this week. And according to Hegseth, this is going to cost money in the billions. Iran intensified its attacks on oil and natural gas facilities around the Gulf on Thursday, raising the stakes in a war that is sending shockwaves through the global economy. The strikes, in retaliation for an Israeli attack on a key Iranian gas field, sent fuel prices soaring and risked drawing Iran's Arab neighbors directly into the conflict, something we've talked about here on this show. Iran's targeting of energy production further stressed global supplies already under pressure because of its stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic waterway through which a fifth of the world's oil is transported. Now, to dive deeper into this, we have our very own Deep State Kuba.
Hello, everybody, and Mubarak, Muslim brothers and sisters. And if you're Jewish, in 12 hours, I guess, Shabbat Shalom, and everybody else. I guess the world sucks, but we're here together.
And also, coming all the way live, you might be having some camera issues from the Green and Red podcast. Please welcome Bob Buzzanco.
How you doing? I'll try to figure this out.
Ooh, even more mysterious than I am.
Uh-oh. Bob disappeared. Bob will be back. I'm sure there's just some camera issues. While we're working on Bob's camera issues, Kuba, can you give us the rundown on what's going on right now? Why is Pete Hegseth saying that this is going to cost gajillions more if this is a war that's already won? And Trump is doing a victory lap.
Well, the shift from attacks on military targets and the sort of indiscriminate bombing of Tehran to strikes against energy infrastructure, both on the Iranian side and on the Gulf side, as well as refineries and electrical stations in Israel, for instance, the port of Haifa and the refinery at Haifa, shifts the cost structure of the conflict and the amount of damage that it's going to do to the global economy. Even if we were just limited to the Strait of Hormuz, there's blockages and disruptions to supply chains just from the traffic that isn't flowing, the deadlines and deliveries that aren't being met. That's a significant issue. But adding on top of that, the time that it takes to repair rebuild infrastructure, resume production of oil and gas, especially in Qatar. Qatar has been heavily damaged. Qatar accounts for something like 20% or more of global liquefied natural gas exports. It's a major supplier of energy to Japan, South Korea, China, and these are countries with major export-based manufacturing sectors. So there'll be knock-on effects in terms of availability of electronics. And in the case of China, basically everything at all, because so much global manufacturing is now based there. So the dislocation associated with this conflict has significantly increased as a result of that change in targeting by both sides. Now, there's an escalation issue. There's a professor, Professor Pape, I think, at the University of Chicago, that describes the situation as an escalation trap. That at this point, disengagement from the conflict would come with significant strategic and political costs for Donald Trump and the United States. Achievement of the objectives that have been laid out, beyond, including regime change and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, requires a shift from a purely air-based campaign to some kind of ground force, ground intervention that will inevitably increase the Iranian response, change the political dynamics of the conflict, and escalate costs quite radically. The fact that they're asking for this money, as well as sending, I believe at this point, there's 3 Marine Expeditionary Forces, Marine Expeditionary units being sent to the Persian Gulf. The 82nd Airborne, like I said, is kind of vanished, which for me suggests a kind of shadow mobilization. So it looks like boots on the ground are going to happen, and they're going to be American. I don't know to what extent they've managed to convince any regional allies, such as the Kurds, perhaps Azerbaijan or Turkey, to intervene. Some of the Gulf states have been talking tough, but when you parse the rhetoric, it's clear that they're referencing defensive operations, and they aren't necessarily volunteering to be the first ones on whatever the equivalent of Omaha Beach is going to be for this conflict. So we're looking at both much longer time horizon. If the cost of the war is about $1 billion to $2 billion a day, they're asking for 200 billion. Well, that's 3 months conservatively, likely more. Similarly, there's going to be an increased strain on resources, longer economic disruption, and the engagement of American personnel that inevitably will suffer some serious losses. These are not going to be easy battles. Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to get a read on this because the misinformation is more than I've ever seen before. But as you pointed out, they've already spent 25 billion. From a military standpoint, they've obviously pummeled Iran badly. They've created an immense amount of destruction, but that's not how you win wars. We saw that in Vietnam, right? The United States killed 3 million people, destroyed Vietnam, dropped millions of tons of bombs, didn't win that war militarily or politically. They're starting to see a fraying of the alliance, obviously. I mean, yesterday, 7 nations put out some kind of vague statement that they would cooperate in opening Hormuz, but didn't really commit to anything beyond that. There are now, I think, I've seen various numbers between 2,500 and 6,000 American troops being deployed to the region. I think at this point, more likely than not, if they were going to be used, it would be, in a kind of a peripheral point like Karg Island. Not in the, I can't imagine, well, with these guys, anything's possible, right? But sending troops into the interior of Iran, I find that hard to believe just because that would be so destructive, right? It's a mountainous region, there's desert. And Iran has been preparing for this for quite some time. There's been this kind of massive dislocation of energy The strike yesterday on Qatar eliminated almost 20% of its LNG capability. So from any standpoint, this isn't going well. And Trump is, the Germans and the French have kind of explicitly said, you're on your own. Even Britain, right? Keir Starmer, who's generally been a puppy dog for Trump, is getting pressure. And, the Arab states have basically said, you're not doing anything for us. You've abandoned us and all you care about is Israel. So it's something that could have been utterly predictable. I mean, the idea that Trump will say, like, we had no idea they were going to block Hormuz, right? If you showed a high school kids a map of the region, I mean, that's, you have this bottleneck there. It's a narrow strait and all this oil goes through it. And I don't want to hog this, but one other thing that I think is important is this kind of a currency aspect of it. And again, I don't know if it's true, but there are these reports now that Iran is willing to allow countries through if they pay in yuan, right? And there were reports yesterday, I don't know if they've been confirmed, that Pakistan is doing that. And so today, Scott Bessent has even said, well, we may remove some of the sanctions on Iranian oil. That's not how you win a war, right? They've been kind of making these capitulations and concessions. The Arab states are obviously very angry because they've been targeted, which is all illegal under international war. If you help a country stage attacks, then you're a legitimate target. So, it's clearly a huge cluster screw up right now, which again could have been predicted. And Iran was no threat. And the last thing I'll say, the one thing that I think is actually remarkable is most Americans are opposed to this. And some people say, well, it's only 50-50. It's like, that's remarkable. They've had 47 years of propaganda about how evil Iran is and how it's a terror threat and how it's trying to take over the region and how they're religious fanatics and they're lunatics. And the media has gone along with that and still is. And yet Americans can see through that. So I think that's actually the one encouraging piece to this.
But of those 47 years, would you guys agree that the beginning part of it is in the Cold War? And if you were, depending on what age you were, you really don't have those same fears. I don't know too many people, even my age, I'm 48, that still fear nuclear war. Do you think Americans really see Iran as some sort of threat this many years later? I mean, we haven't had hostage crises. I was 2 when that happened, so I don't really have a visible memory. In Cuba, I know for a fact you weren't born yet when that happened. So
Indeed.
only Bob was there.
Well, I remember the Iran crisis quite well. I mean, that's the venom was pretty incredible. I mean, there was just this like incredible attack and hatred, on all levels. They were evil, they were dark. The Ayatollah was demonic with this big beard. In America, they were selling T-shirts that said Ayatollah Asahola, which were very popular at the time. And then
That even made it nuisance.
Yeah, and I think, and then the United States helped contrive this Iraq War for 8 years as well, which killed 1 million people. But yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I think we don't talk about nuclear weapons like we used to when I was younger. I'm much older than both of you. But at the same time, I think this is the first time in my kind of adult life I've genuinely thought that there could be a nuclear weapon used. So, but even so, Iran doesn't get good PR in the United States. I think we can agree on that. So, I think most Americans see through this.
Yeah, and as unpopular as the war is in the United States, it is much, much worse. The ability to sell this conflict in Europe, for instance.
Yeah.
Poland, which is an uncharacteristically pro-American country by European standards, it's something like 80% of Poles don't want to touch the conflict in any possible way, and there's even a significant minority in Poland that sympathizes openly with the Islamic Republic. That you weren't the aggressor. In fact, Iranian ambassador was recently on Polish TV doing a bit of a charm offensive, saying that we consider Poland to be our great friend in Europe, and what we would just ask is that you consider the humanitarian dimension of this conflict and the suffering of our civilians and the innocent people of Iran, and that you advocate on their behalf, and that's what we would like to hear from you. And it was a very well received interview, uh, especially since it stands in stark contrast to the behavior of the Israeli and the American ambassadors in Poland that have been going full asshole. And um, this the failure of American diplomacy in trying to shore up some sort of allied support after refusing to consult with anybody or even alert many of its key allies before this attack has really been remarkable. You have most recently the White House meeting with Sanae Takaichi, the Japanese prime minister, who came in, conservative figure, um, said that she was happy to work with Trump, make America great again, did all of the things which implied that there could be a close relationship, and you golden age is how they put it in Japanese American relations. And she has to sit there while Trump riffs about Pearl Harbor and how you sneaky Japanese, you like surprise even more than we do, which I can't exaggerate how much of shock and how deeply insulted the Japanese were at this type of behavior. You could tell in the translation and in the um, reaction of the room that there was this horrified silence when the comment was translated, and you could read it all over the prime minister's features that this was really a serious faux pas.
But he thinks he's
And
Rodney Dangerfield when he's off script, Kuba.
yeah, but it doesn't matter, right? Like
Oh, I agree with you.
if you're bombing on stage, that's worse than bombing Iran. And when you parse all of the statements that are made that get presented in the media as, oh, look, the allies are coming to the rescue. Oh, look, there's support for this conflict internationally. Well, it is true that generally speaking, you do get a lot of condemnation of the Islamic Republic and of Iranian actions. It's a little one-sided coming from American allies, but there are no commitments to actually do anything about it. The only European country which has offered to actually intervene, to do something about the Strait of Hormuz militarily, has been Estonia, which took a second look and realized that it would take 1 to 2 years to retrofit their minesweepers to operate in the Persian Gulf. So you're zero for how many ever NATO partners there are in Europe. Canada, Australia, other non-European allies have also said no. Right, this comes on top of the removal of air defenses from South Korea, which provoked a major scandal over there. Right, allies feel betrayed. They weren't consulted in this. The way that the United States is behaving, the way that their rhetoric is flowing. Right, Pete Hegseth explicitly called European allies ungrateful. All of this is burning through whatever residual goodwill allowed the United States to play a leadership role in this alliance system. Everyone else is seeing that the Mark Carney offer for some sort of association, some sort of deeper security and economic partnership with middle powers is much more attractive. Um, that's the only way to really Trump-proof your international standing. And we've had one other Canadian former prime minister, Stephen Harper, who um, was extremely pro-American, extremely pro-Israeli. He said that Canada has no greater friend than Israel. He described himself as perhaps the most pro-American Canadian prime minister in history. And he said in a public interview, you could see on his face that this pained him, that a year ago he would have advised Carney to take this brinksmanship from the United States, this challenge, as an opportunity to deepen and solidify relations with the United States, integrate more fully as a security and trading partner with the US. But at this point, he cannot countenance that. He cannot, in good conscience, recommend that. And instead, Carney keep doing as he's doing and pursue the diversification of Canadian economic and security relationships, move away from dependency on the United States. So this is a severe challenge to the US-led international order. Further deterioration, if we think about the period up until the end of the Cold War as an era where the United Nations, the Security Council, international law were in some ways governing norms, very frequently breached, but they were the architecture that countries appealed to justify their actions, to explain their security policy. Then we had the rules-based international order, which moves away from multilateral institutions and any notion that there was an authority above the United States to check its hegemony. But the United States did promise a sort of regular, consistent performance of its leadership, something predictable, and one which privileged its allies at the very least. And now it appears that the system is entirely chaotic. It is broken down to the point where countries are looking for alternatives. They have to build their own architecture if they want something durable.
Bob?
This is also a continuation of Gaza, of Palestine, which, even though the Europeans have kind of fallen in line more or less, although Germany has removed itself kind of as a defense witness for Israel at the ICJ. But I think the ground was already tilled because, the world has been just so revulsed at what Israel's done. And in the U.S., as you know, one of the main, I would argue probably the main analysis of this is that Israel forced Trump's hand, which I think is simplistic. But so I think this is seen as a continuation that the U.S. is doing Israel's bidding and Israel is committing a genocide and now Israel is in Lebanon. And so and to your point about Europe, I think the country I follow most closely is Italy. And Meloni's always been pretty reliable. And, she's in fairly strong terms renounced this and essentially said, hey, I like Trump, but we don't have to go along with everything he does. And, this is like in the Vietnam era, which I study closely. This happened so much so that in 1971, Henry Kissinger declared that would be the year of Europe, because he understood that, the Vietnam War is destroying America's global alliances. But Trump has this unilateral idea. He and Hegseth are, I would say, like, this government is like a sixth grade boys' locker room, right? And they talk tough and they spit out these insults and act like they can do anything they want. So it's a really perilous situation in that regard. And the U.S. is definitely going it alone. And I think people and have this idea that these are smart folks and they're really kind of dumb. And to not foresee any of this is really, really, really striking, right? To think that, Iran was just going to surrender or they were going to capitulate in a day or two. And so, this is where we are now. They have these huge levers. The media has finally discovered the term asymmetrical warfare. Iran. I mean, Iran is pummeled and, militarily it could not compete, but it has all these other abilities to do that. And now, using, I think, it understands the global economy is the real target. And it's doing a fairly significant job of monkey wrenching that. Oil, I checked before I came on. It was $104 right now. I think it hit 119 last night. I was talking to somebody yesterday who does finance who said, they used to scoff at the idea it could become 200 a barrel. And now they're legitimately considering that could happen. The market, Pam Bondi can no longer brag about it being $50,000, whatever that meant. It's down to 46. Oil companies will do well because they're going to raise the price of oil. The military industrial complex always does well, right? Their stocks are soaring right now. But, the other part of this, and I'm not sure how far this goes, because I think we tend to focus on people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Trump's coalition here clearly isn't happy about this either. And they're putting up actually more of a resistance than the Democratic Party, which is, again, shows how useless it is. Yeah.
To pick up on what you're saying about the lack of foresight and the poor quality of American leadership at this point, because I think that part of the reaction that you're seeing from traditional U.S. allies has to do with not necessarily an issue with America's war aims or America's underlying agenda. there's always been suspicion about the extent to which the United States serves its own interests rather than abiding by the rules that it sets up for everybody else. And that's kind of baked in to the internal politics of a lot of traditional Western allies, the Japanese, etc. But there's always been a sense that there's a competence underlying the U.S. statecraft, U.S. warfighting, U.S. International policy. And now that confidence that these people are capable, that these people know what they're doing, um, it's not Dick Cheney anymore, evil genius. It's evil and stupid. And that combination is actually infinitely more dangerous. So we have that causing this deterioration. And I want to sort of explain how I see that coming about beyond just the individual figures at the top, right? Obviously, Trump, Pete Hegseth, to use a reactionary Twitter term, they're low IQ material. But what has taken place ever since Trump's inauguration has been kind of house cleaning of the entire security apparatus. Anyone that has been suspected of disloyalty, anyone that was involved in any investigations or initiatives that Trump didn't like, anybody that could be connected to DEI, all the quote unquote woke generals, they've been cleared out. Anyone who pushes back against Trump's policy preferences, cleared out. Well, you do that often enough, and you lose crucial expertise because sometimes entire departments, for instance, in the State Department, the unit that was responsible for energy politics and planning, that was just doged to death. You've had a recent purge of Iranian counterterrorism experts because they were associated with the classified documents case against Donald Trump when he took all of those boxes in to Mar-a-Lago after his first term ended. So you have a loss of expertise, including very specialized and responsible people. So creating these giant blind spots. You have an overworked cadres. The people who are left have to take on additional responsibilities in order to stretch to try to cover the duties of all of the people who have been dismissed. You haven't had long enough to bring in new people and ramp up, to the extent that it's not an oxymoron, MAGA talent. And you, I think that what their internal logic behind all of this is, instead of questionably loyal people that might leak, that might whistleblow, that might go to Congress, we'll use AI because it's just as smart, if not smarter, but it is absolutely loyal. It doesn't talk back. But this is not a silver bullet. Obviously, we've seen issues. The strike against the girls' school was likely a combination of low quality human supervision and mass AI target selection. You do get much faster processes for certain types of duties by integrating AI into the kill chain. But then you've integrated AI into the kill chain, right? Like, that statement alone should give you pause. Maybe somebody needs to take a look before you actually pull the trigger. But you've also fired all the people who would be the most suited for that. So I think that the quality of the people making decisions at every level has deteriorated significantly since the Biden administration. And I'd be very curious to know if that had any impact on the successful Iranian targeting and damaging of the F-35 yesterday. That represents a very serious challenge to American warfighting doctrine. I'm happy to get into that a little bit more, but I want to give Bob a chance to respond.
Well, I mean, those are the reports, right? That they struck an F-135. There are also reports, which I think are probably credible, that they're getting intelligence from Russia. And I don't want to get into the whole kind of Russia conspiracy thing, which was always a red herring, I think. But The point you make is really important, that he's purged people. The area I follow closest, which I've been doing my whole career, is the military, right? And, I think a lot of lefties have this idea that they're all Dr. Strangelove. And in fact, there's actually a fairly diverse group of people in the military, a lot of whom don't really want to fight wars. And they're gone, right? Trump has gotten rid of, like, the Caribbean Command, who question, killing people in boats. And so you now have Kane. Well, there are kind of reports which you have to kind of read cryptically, where even Kane has been warning them about this. So I think, you do have military people who are saying this isn't as easy as you think. But then you have Hegseth and Trump, who are, I was telling somebody the other day, there are no George Kennans and Averell Harrimans in this group, or even like, George Bush Sr. or Jim Baker. There's, to use that, cliche phrase, there aren't any grown-ups in the room, right? There's no one there. Apparently J.D. Vance, which is really even more frightening, right? If Vance has become the voice of reason, and then on the outside you have, Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Carrie Jean, Bowler, who are, it's really nuts. Yeah, I think Iran's capabilities clearly were underestimated. And Iran has been preparing for this. They were, I don't know how last summer in the 12-day war, they were caught off guard, right? That they were somehow surprised that Trump attacked, because they were in negotiations, which were actually going well. Just like this time, the Omani minister. And actually, one of the more shocking headlines I think I've ever seen the other day in The Guardian, who was it? The British diplomat who said Witkoff and Kushner were under the control of a foreign agent. That's actually quite stunning, right? Can you imagine in the height of the Cold War if somebody from Britain had said, Kennan and Harriman are under the control of Soviet influence? That would be like the biggest global scandal. That's John Profumo stuff, right? Or Jonathan Pollard stuff. And it just kind of passes by casually. And the media has done just a horrific job as well. But yeah, I think Saudi clearly has intelligence. Saudi's been successful. You mentioned earlier the THAAD missiles in Korea, which are being dismantled. The United States is buying interceptors from Ukraine, and the minesweepers are all in Philadelphia right now, which indicates that did they not know they were going to do this? Did they not know they would need them? Were they that unprepared?
Those minesweepers were deployed, and they were retired from the Gulf. Yeah. So they were in position until just before this conflict. Yeah. And then they were sent away to be mothballed and stored as museum ships. The insanity.
I'm not a conspiracy guy at all.
AI clearly isn't as smart as it's
yeah. No. No, exactly. And like, so, Trump is impetuous. I still always find it hard to believe that Israel is telling Trump what to do. The United States, I've always thought, kind of Israel was a really vital asset. It's a sub-imperial power in the region. Israel's done a lot of stuff so the U.S. didn't have to do it. And when the U.S. did it, like the Gulf War, it was a clusterfuck, right? But now I have no idea. That's the thing. Like the history doesn't help the way, I wish it would. And applying logic doesn't really make a lot of sense. One thing that I see throughout history is there are goals you can achieve without this. And Iran had, the 2015 JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, pretty much gave the U.S. what it wanted. That's kind of one of the few things about Obama I would give him his flowers for. And so they had that. And the agreements that Iran had allegedly agreed to, which coming from both Oman and Britain now, seem legitimate, were all Trump could have needed. So why keep going? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
Is Trump a wild card for you, Bob, in a way that you've never seen before? Yeah. Well, this question goes to both of you. Both of you have studied this kind of war history for a long time. But does Trump truly present something new in that he's not tethered to ideology to the point where, or rules, or even a historic understanding of the moment? That does it feel like to you that he just wants to take his ball and go home too, because this isn't working out the way that he liked it, and has no idea of what that actually looks like? Like, you can take your ball and go home, but you've set off a chain of events now, and you've really kind of poked the bear, so to speak, in Iran. Is this a frightening moment for the Trump regime?
So the way that I understand that Trump cannot be understood in terms of doctrine or strategy or philosophy, right? He does not think or operate on those levels. I worked for a boss when I was in DC who had a very similar psychology to Trump. And the way that he interpreted life, the way that he saw power relations, whether at the individual level or between countries, was just an infinite series of dominance competitions. Every meeting, every phone call, every interaction, every war was just a dominance competition where you flexed and asserted power and prerogative, which forced the other person to back down and give you what they wanted. And he, at the age of 68, after a very impressive career, but one not without its reversals, insisted that he had never lost a single interaction, that he had always come out on top. Every time he picked up the phone, every time he spoke with anybody in any negotiation. And I think that Trump has a very similar attitude. Everything is a negotiation, and he's always the winner. And he would like, I think, to disengage. He sees this as a long-term loser, that it's going to bleed him and cost him more than he could potentially gain at the end. But he cannot countenance the idea that he will have to take an L, right? That the Iranians will be able to claim victory in any possible way. So his instinct, whenever he reaches a point where um, it looks like he may be forced to accept a defeat, is either to call in favors to try to get somebody to bail him out. In the past, that was his father, or Roy Cohn, or Rudy Giuliani, or some other fixer type that could come in and clean up his mess, Steve Bannon, or um, escalate, right? Raise the stakes to the point where everybody else in the world being more responsible than him will back down. And that's why this particular conflict, even though we're not talking about great powers, it's not the Soviet Union, it's not Russia, it's not China, um, even though this is a regional conflict at this stage, it does feel like there's a risk of escalation, not only to ground troops and an occupation or an attempt at conquest or regime change on the ground, but potentially down the road. I don't know how you tell him you have to let the Iranians just win um, before he decides to be the second president to use nuclear weapons.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, I can't, really add to that your personal, because that's terrifying, right? That this guy thinks so. But if you look at his public actions, you kind of get that sense, right? First off, I'm not even sure who's making these decisions. I've been, kind of thinking that like Stephen Miller is the domestic president and Lindsey Graham is now the foreign policy president, because Trump is just all over the place. Yesterday, the stuff he said about Pearl Harbor, I mean, in normal times that would be disqualifying, right? You would kind of 25th Amendment the guy, right? And yet it's just Thursday
Trump
in the White House. Yeah. I've never seen anything like it. And I always believe there's not necessarily rational. I don't believe that at all, actually, that these people are rational, but there's something there that clearly doesn't jibe. Today, there was a report that they're considering going in and actually trying to capture the fissionable material, which is, I think there's 800 pounds or something like that. I can't remember. That's insane. That's utter insanity, to send, like, it's a James Bond movie shit, And so, Iran has the upper hand, not in terms, I mean, it's suffered immense damage. Who knows how many people have killed, buildings, people assassinated. And there were some people in the Vietnam era who kind of, went by the body count. Oh, we killed 2000 VC this week. We're in great shape. And it meant nothing. And I mean, I think that would be his out, right? We killed Khomeini. We killed was like Johnny, we killed this and that, and we succeeded. But that doesn't open Hormuz, and China's sitting back, just kind of counting its money. It's unlike anything I've seen, and as a history professor, as a historian, and somebody who studied this stuff, I can't apply logic to it. So here we are. I just he's different. I do think so. Yeah. I mean, even there was a certain logic to Bush and Cheney. You could kind of understand that, right? As much as you hated it, I think Kennedy and Johnson, who were embedded the U.S. deeply into Vietnam, coming out of World War II. Why wouldn't you, right? Vietnam is a small country. That makes sense. They were wrong. This, I have no idea what's going on there. And Iran now has as a bargaining chip, right? And so the U.S. may have to lift all the sanctions. So. And Besson even said that today. We may have to lift oil sanctions. So that's a huge victory. That's a huge victory for the Iranians.
And before we get into questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you guys, there's been a defector from the MAGA administration that actually published their letter of defection and then went on Tucker Carlson to just, I don't know, reignite the QAnon crowd, if you will.
Yep.
What do you think is going to happen with this information that's out now that one of a higher up in the MAGA regime has defected so publicly? I said this before, I think with you, Kuba, that I felt like Marjorie Taylor Greene was a canary in the coal mine, that this is bad for business moving forward for most of these people, even though Taylor Greene left politics altogether. She does have to distance herself if she wants to be in any business. So Kuba, what do you see happening with this defection?
Well, if you look at the by-elections, special elections at the state and federal level, it's something like 18-0. Democrats have been flipping a remarkable number of the contests. The Republicans haven't flipped a single seat. There's some incumbents that have managed to, or some Republican seats that they've managed to hold, but they haven't made any inroads, despite the fact that this is supposed to be this transformational MAGA presidency. I think that there is a great deal of disenchantment among certain elements of this coalition, and that Marjorie Taylor Greene, this recent move by the anti-terrorism czar, Tucker Carlson's repositioning as Zionist, anti-Zionist, like a white Hamas fighter, that's creating a space for to incubate a new type of right-wing party that can survive the iceberg Titanic strike that looks like the midterm elections and this whole Trump presidency. So I think that you're absolutely right about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that this repositioning is necessary if you want to have any kind of career, if you want to have any kind of future in politics. I think that Tucker Carlson, that movement, which is still confined to mostly younger, plugged-in members of the right wing, it hasn't percolated down to the mass level, but it will, right? When people are feeling the economic pain that goes along with this war and Trump's policies, they'll be looking for people to interpret it. And the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, the white Christian nationalism that Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, other types of figures like this are spinning, well, that's going to hit. That's going to work for a lot of Americans, much more so than the Zoran Mamdani democratic socialist appeal to broad class-based politics. And I'm a little anxious at the Cenk Tucker bromance, right? Shoe theory, right? Like, I was going to say that this is the red-brown alliance, but it feels more like the white-brown alliance. And I think that it's very risky. Hassan Piker deserves some credit because I think that he really articulated what the danger is looking at 2028, which is that a figure from that set, that anti-Zionist Christian white nationalist set, whether it's Tucker Carlson or somebody that he sponsors, based on an anti-Israel, put America first, get out of this war position, is able to, if they're put up against a standard issue, Josh Shapiro, um, pro-Israel Democrat, or somebody like Kamala Harris, then they'll be able to make inroads with not only independents but some segments of the left just around the issue of Israel, and you'll end up with a Republican victory with Reagan type numbers. Right? That's the real danger here. That the successor doesn't come out of the Trump-based MAGA, but out of the reaction against them, and is able to create enough daylight with the assist coming from pro-Israel Democrats to capture that energy again. So that's my anxiety about the impact on U.S. politics.
Yeah, I saw the Hassan Piker interview yesterday. I don't think it would be Reagan type numbers, but he's I think his point's really valid. I mean, Joe Kent in 72 hours now has become like a kind of a hero. I'm going to be Tom Friedman here for a minute. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's in banking. He's in his late 30s, who said that people don't understand how popular Nick Fuentes is among young men. Mm-hmm. And, he's like, you kind of ignoring that at your own peril. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who may be positioning herself for 2028. And the Democratic Party is whistling past the graveyard, right? They lost in 2024 because of Gaza. They've hid in this autopsy, which everybody knows what it said. And, as you pointed out, I mean, Josh Shapiro's an IDS researcher. One thing that kind of struck me, what's his name? Gavin Newsom, who's kind of is a weather vane, right? Mm-hmm. Newsom is not criticizing Israel, and Newsom has no politics or character or anything like that. He's just going by whatever, which way whatever the way the wind blows. But the right wing, in a lot of ways, has assumed the initiative in this. They've taken the momentum off this. On the other hand, you had this race in Illinois with Kat Abba-Ghazala. If she hadn't spoken out about Palestine, she would have gotten like 2% of the vote, and she could have won if the other progressive candidates had dropped out or whatever. So this is, I think, kind of the dominant issue of the coming years. In Texas, where I lived there for 30 years, Crockett, in large measure, lost because she was all in with Israel, and I think ran a dismal campaign as well. So this is, the Democratic Party is late to this. And in some cases, like with Carlson, I think it very well could be like a legitimate anti-Semitism. Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene in previous years have said some pretty insensitive stuff. But yeah, I think the American people are, if you're my age, I mean, I grew up in an era where, I grew up kind of in a New Deal Democratic family where you supported the Democrats, you supported labor, and you supported Israel. And Americans probably, I don't know, back then it was probably 80-20 or 90-10. In the most recent polls, 41% of Americans are kind of like pro-Palestinian and only 36% are pro-Israel. And among Democrats, it's wildly, that's stunning for somebody of my generation, that flip could happen. So we're clearly in some kind of realignment. The Democrats don't give a shit. I mean, like you pointed out, Kamala Harris is talking about running again. And, they have no shame. They're as cultish, thankfully not violent, but they're as cultish as the Republicans are, right? They still put Hillary Clinton out there and let her speak, and they praise Obama. And, you talked about what Trump said. Look at the drone attacks. Obama was droning wedding parties and, residential neighborhoods. It's a bizarro time. I can't, I again lived through Watergate, which at the time seemed cataclysmic. I mean, that was just stunning. It was like a massive earthquake in the entire country. And, 6 years later, Reagan is president. Nothing changed. It got worse. And that's always my fear. There's one of my favorite historians is Arno Mayer, European historian of the late 19th, early 20th century. And one of his key themes was the persistence of the old regime. where you have these massive changes, whether it be the late 19th century revolutions in Europe or World War I, where all these socialist parties emerged. And then, within a generation, the old regime is back and stronger than ever. And I think that's, if you look at the US, if you look like the period after Watergate, you clearly see that, right? Watergate leads to Jimmy Carter, which immediately leads to Reagan and, the Democratic Leadership Conference and Clinton and Obama. And, now, Bernie Sanders, I'm not a fan of Bernie Sanders. I don't know what you guys think of him, but I mean, Bernie Sanders is essentially a Mark Hatfield, Jacob Javits Republican, the way I look at him. So I think we are on this crest where somebody like Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene could definitely use this, kind of look at what Israel's doing. Israel controls the United States. Look at all the money we're spending in Israel as a springboard to much bigger things.
I don't think either one of them wants to be president.
I don't know. Somebody like that. I don't think Vance and Rubio are legit, but what do I know? I mean, I thought Clinton was going to win in 2016. So yeah.
I think a lot of us thought Clinton was going to win in 2016 because I don't know how many people
was going to win.
Hang out in, shitty parts of I shouldn't say shitty parts, but I don't know. 2012 was a year for me that I have never had experienced so much Obama hate.
Yeah.
Touring musician in these, kind of flyover parts of the country, the amount of anti-Obama apparel that I would see, the looks I would get just walking into a filling station. It was a different time, the 2012 to 2016. I definitely was like, oh, well, maybe then, Hillary was not the right opponent. I think if people wanted Trump not to happen.
Well, in 2016 here, and I'm in Youngstown, Ohio, which is used to be the kind of the heart of labor and industry. And the people I knew in 2016 liked Trump and Bernie Sanders, and they kind of saw them as co-equal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they hated Hillary Clinton, but I still thought she was going to. But the clear in 2016 when Jeb Bush got just crushed in the Republican primary, I did say that's a canary in a coal mine. I mean, he had, I don't know how many gazillions of dollars at the time. And I don't think he won a single delegate. And the Democratic Party is always, they're still stuck in the DLC. Let's move further to the right. So, I mean, they won't, they won't talk about Israel. Look at Schumer. The only time I've ever seen Chuck Schumer get excited and smile, God knows. I mean, his wife, when she's in the mood, probably, brings a flag out or something to get them all, he doesn't need Viagra. He needs a picture of Netanyahu or something like that, So, the only time I ever see him excited.
Well, we have some questions here from the viewing audience. First question is from Snackweight, a fellow Canuck Kuba. Kuba, could this war on Iran be part of a plan to increase the energy insecurity of Europe, making it easier for the USA to get concessions for Greenland, giving them control of minerals and the NWP?
The Northwest Passage. I don't think that there was a plan. I think that Trump had a feeling that the Iranians would back down, that he would win the dominance contest very quickly and get whatever he wanted, right? There's one of his advisors was on one of the news programs before the conflict. He said that Trump was surprised that the Iranians hadn't capitulated already. And that's what he's looking for. He's looking for a humiliation ritual from Iran as part of this, right? That's what he needs to feel as though there's a sufficient resolution for him to move on. So I don't think that there's some kind of 4D chess to squeeze the Europeans. When he wants to squeeze the Europeans, he just yells at them, right? He just calls them ungrateful. He just makes demands. He just tells them he wants Greenland. I do think that this will. I think that there's going to be a great deal of short-term pain, 3 to 5 years, as a result of these energy shocks. I think that there are alternative sources and alternative technologies which can be introduced at speed and scale to mitigate the longer term consequences. For instance, I wouldn't be surprised if we see renewed interest in things like green hydrogen production. and you've got extraordinarily cheap solar energy right now. You have regions in which you can use that for uh, hydrolysis of water, produce cheap hydrogen, use that as a fuel source for the things that you can't electrify. For electricity production, right? Natural gas has been the sort of cleaner fossil fuel alternative to get away from coal and oil. It's been very attractive for a lot of countries. And when Europe shrugged its shoulders after the Ukraine invasion and abandoned some of its more ambitious green targets, it was natural gas and other fossil fuels that enjoyed a revival. But those plans are still sitting on a table in Brussels. They haven't fired those experts. Those departments are still there. And I expect that between increased production in Norway, the exploitation of fields in Canada, and the shift to renewable technology, the fact that China has shown everybody that it can be done at this point, I think that that's going to be a mitigation strategy. It'll take a while to incubate, but I don't think that the energy weapon will stay the same kind of blackmail tool, gun to the head, that it is right now.
You want to add
Yeah,
anything to that, Bob?
I think, yeah, I can't really add much to that. There were reports yesterday that Denmark was prepared to blow up its own runways. So I think the Greenland posturing probably is kind of strengthened Europe's resolve on this. The other part, somebody had a comment there. This stuff isn't easy. Trump has this idea. It's like, reindustrialization. You flip a switch in Pittsburgh and, they're making steel. You flip a switch in Detroit, they're making cars. These are long-term processes that I don't know if they understand or not. So, but I really can't add to what you said. That was, such a thorough explanation.
This is from Red, another Midwesterner. Kuba, will the Houthis eventually get involved? They have threatened as much, and it seems they could help Iran to put a huge amount of pressure on the U.S. and Israel.
I think so. I think that Iran has been very careful in maintaining some levers to allow for escalation. The Iranians are, Trump even admitted that these are very smart people, that they do have strategy, they do have plans, and they have an awareness of what diplomacy requires. I think that Iran would really, really like to have an off-ramp, right? They made all kinds of concessions before this war. They responded in an extremely measured and restrained way in 2025 during the 12-day war. So Iran, their dream would be some kind of settlement which gives them security, which rebalances power in the region, and which is durable going forward. That's the whole reason why they've maintained this nuclear capability, because they see that that's the only thing that can really lock in long-term national security. Right? That's the only vaccine against foreign regime change. And so the Houthis are one point of escalation that they'll bring in. What we've seen in Iraq as well is the mobilization of the Popular Mobilization Forces, these Shia militia that had been activated in the fight against ISIS and that worked very closely with the IRGC, especially with Qasem Soleimani in the fight over Mosul and the Syrian civil war. They have been activated and they're moving against American bases and American assets within Iraq. My understanding is that today or yesterday, the Green Zone, the American embassy in Baghdad, has been abandoned as a result of the pressure that's been applied by the PMF. So that front, right, like Iraq, may eventually flip towards the Iranian side in this conflict, and that opens up the possibility to apply pressure directly to Kuwait as well. So Iran has other cards to play, It's not just the drones. It's not just the missiles. It's not just the Strait of Hormuz. Um, there are these other elements at work. Hezbollah has been very successful in penetrating the Iron Dome defenses, and today it turned out that part of that was the result of an agent that they had suborned inside the IDF that gave them technical information that allowed them to breach the system. So um, there's capabilities here that we're not seeing. For instance, I don't know why they were able to target and strike that F-35, and this is an issue of serious concern for me, and it should be keeping everyone at the Department of Defense up at night
Department of
because
War.
this plane is supposed to be invisible. It's supposed to be part of a system that lets you wipe out any air defense before it even knows you're there. And that's the entire basis of American air war doctrine right now. If these can be targeted, that means that something has gone wrong. Either the Iranians got lucky, that happens sometimes, or there's some combination, some new way that they're using their known air defenses, some new technology that may have been supplied by Russia or China, or some breach in the F-35's operating system. I don't just need the software that operates it, but the F-35 requires a very special types of basing, very special infrastructure all around it. It's got an insane amount of code that runs all of the systems internally. It needs to communicate with different sensors, ground-based radar, other airplanes. If any at any of these points, there's some kind of breach or compromise that allows the Iranians to then track where the F-35s are, well, that would completely upend the way that the United States pursues air war. So that's a major issue, and I think that we'll have those cards slowly revealed as the Iranians try to ratchet up tension and respond to different forms of American and Israeli escalation. Israel, at this point, with its move against energy targets, with its assassination campaign against the leadership, it's been willing to ratchet up the pain, ratchet up the damage against Iran in ways which basically force Iranian counter-escalation. And this is an extremely dangerous kind of cycle. It's a little reassuring that there are cards to play before the next 9/11, before blowing up a dirty bomb in Tel Aviv, for real horrors targeting the civilian population. But frankly, it's also deeply disquieting that there's so much more damage, so many more points of vulnerability on both sides.
Last week, I spoke with Fadi Kafiti, who's finishing his dissertation on Yemen, in fact. And so we spoke actually at length about the Houthi. And I think the point he made was that they've actually been damaged pretty badly over the last several years. So basically don't expect as much out of them as you've seen, not out of, will, but just because of, they've been hit pretty hard. Let me ask you a question, though, because you seem to know this stuff way better than I do. What was it, on day 2 or 3? I'm so kind of discombobulated. 3 planes, American planes, were shot down in Kuwait, which they claimed by friendly fire, which seemed, kind of seems squirrely to me. What happened there?
So my understanding from the sources that I've looked at is that this was an insider hit. Don't forget that among the public in the Gulf states, this war and cooperation with Israel, the long-standing security agreements with the United States, even as unpopular as the Shia Islamic Republic of Iran might be, there's a real distaste for all of that. And that's true among the elite as well as the mass, the general public. My understanding is that the Kuwaiti pilot thought that this war was bullshit and shot down some Americans.
That was my first guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is probably another reason why we don't see the Gulf states playing a more aggressive role against Iran. All of these countries, don't forget, are run by small, closed elites as absolutist monarchies. They do not have organic connections with the mass of the population. In many cases, the mass of the population, such as Dubai or Qatar, is rife with third country nationals.
Yeah.
Right? It's largely outsiders. So the security forces are there to protect the regime. They're there to protect the royal family against the people and against the other security forces. So there isn't a military coup. After all, the military brought down the monarchy of Iraq. A military coup brought down the monarchy of Egypt, brought down the monarchy of Libya, right, one after another. So that's the number one security risk for the Saudi royal family, and all of the sheikhs and emirs of the Gulf. Therefore, they're not really capable. They're not designed to fight the Iranians. The Americans are supposed to be the ones fighting the Iranians. Instead, these forces are supposed to keep an eye on one another. And if you activate them against the Iranians, if you give them live ammunition, well, you're rolling the dice that they don't immediately coup you. Because even if they want to fight the Iranians, they could just coup you and then tell the Americans, we're still cool. We're still going to do the anti-Iran thing, but now I am the captain now.
I have that picture in my head, but it's you instead of the little skinny Somali. Does Kuba have an opinion on World War? This seems to be a word I see buzzing around.
Well, that's the thing. Earlier, I mentioned how there's been this sort of stepwise degeneration from a notion of multilateral institutions and the UN as a kind of governing body over international security. In theory, no war without a Security Council resolution during the Cold War, to the degenerate rules-based order where you no longer have multilateralism. Instead, you have a single hegemon, but there was going to be some kind of grandfathering in a lot of conventions and rules that would make the behavior of great powers predictable, rational, and allow other states to adjust and transparently understand their risks and benefits. Now, it looks like the United States just does whatever it wants. It'll kill people in the middle of negotiations. It will attack you without any provocation, without any pretext. It doesn't even bother going to the UN for a rubber stamp. Right now, there was a poll recently published where the publics of France, the UK, Germany, and Canada were asked if they have greater trust in the United States as a world leader under Trump or the People's Republic of China. All four favored the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China, because they actually seem able to make agreements, stand by them, and follow rules that have been established. Whereas the United States, at least under a MAGA administration, you can no longer take that for granted, and it's therefore so much more dangerous. So the world security architecture has fallen apart. Two out of the three great powers are already involved in major conflicts. China seems like it's biding its time. Frankly, the whole do nothing, win strategy is really paying off for them. And so I think that we're already in a period of global crisis and conflict. It might not take the form of something like World War I or World War II, where you've got front lines in the middle of Europe and huge swaths of territory changing hands, right? One side or the other trying to paint the map. But if you think about where we started at the end of the Cold War, where you had all of these states transitioning towards some kind of democracy and periodic flare-ups of chaotic disorder, places like Somalia or Haiti, ones which then became custodial cases of the international order. You might have some UN intervention, but Rwanda, Congo, there was bandwidth for these to be huge, scandalous international issues because the rest of the world seemed to be doing fine. What's happened is that none of those security crises have been resolved. Somalia is still a mess. Haiti is still a disaster. The Congo is still fragmented and brutalized, right? And instead, you just had this increasing zone of chaos, state fragmentation, disorder, and violence. One country after another, one regime after another, being brought down with nothing to stand up in its place. I think that those chickens are finally coming home to roost. And we're going to see that disorder moving from the exception in an orderly world to having a few islands of relative stability. Maybe Carney's Middle Powers, maybe the PRC, maybe Modi's India, and then vast regions that are subject to bombings, where violence is the rule, and there is no stable or consistent governance. And I think the United States, because of its polarization, political polarization, because of the fact that Trump has shredded the internal rules, the internal security and political architecture of the United States, as much as he has the international order, right? He completely disregards constitutional limitations. He flagrantly violates congressional rules. Look at the Epstein files, after all. Disregards judicial injunctions, right? He has a supine Supreme Court that is willing to rubber stamp 90% of what crosses their docket. But when it came to tariffs, he threw an enormous fit and immediately found ways to keep doing what he wanted to do. So that breakdown of the internal structures of power and authority in the United States also opens up the possibility that of serious disorder that will eventually be settled through violence. And I'd say this with profound anxiety for a country that I've lived many years in and that I have a great fondness for. Well, like people within the country and stuff that's there.
Bob, I'm sure you have some opinions.
Well, I mean, I can't really add that much to that. A world war in the sense that there would be theaters of operation in Asia and North America and Europe. Probably not. I mean, almost certainly not. But we're well, obviously there's a big regional war, and the media kind of keep talking about the Iran war. It's already been a regional war, and it clearly is now. But in terms of like economic war, it's a global war right now. We're seeing that. For years, a lot of lefties have talked about de-dollarization, and I never thought that was serious, and I'm still not sure. But the dollar is under attack. All these transnational organizations are under attack. There's been this kind of repudiation of things like the WTO, as you pointed out, I think, which is really important, China's kind of just sitting back and kind of letting all this happen. If there's kind of a global hegemony right now, it's probably shared, and who knows, China in many ways is in a better position. One thing that strikes me is, the United States is spending close to it is spending $1 trillion now. It's running out of equipment. It's running out of material, which is really wild, right? What are they spending this money on, right? AI, technology, contractors. So, I mean, the global system is more perilous than it's been in my adult life. I was too young to understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, but since then, even Vietnam, I don't think there was any sense that was going to expand into a global conflict. 9/11 was obviously pretty terrible, but nothing like this. So I don't expect to see, battles in Los Angeles and Paris and Beijing and Tokyo, things like that. But economically, there could be terror attack. I mean, what's Iran going to do? Iran, they're fighting for their very survival. They're not going to attack the United States. China's not going to do it. They're not stupid. And, it's, look what's happening like in Latin America. I mean, it breaks my heart to see Cuba, right? And the Brazilians and the Mexicans and the Colombians, there's really not much they can do. And they're not doing much about it. So in this sense, you have this kind of atavistic power just willing to throw its weight around, which is horrible enough. And you're seeing these conflicts take place in various spots, but in terms of like a coordinated global conflict, I doubt that.
This is the final question because I know it's getting late for you guys. Kuba and Bob, what does the world look like in 5 years if this regime keeps moving forward in the direction that they are going? You want to start it off, Bob? Or you don't want to say because you're...
Well, no, I mean, yeah, it's pretty bleak. I mean, every prediction I make is wrong. It's not good, right? I think you're going to have kind of more economic distress here in the United States. This kind of increased surveillance regime, which is just going to get bigger and bigger. This kind of dystopian ideas where, the Department of Defense and AI are working together, and, all the stuff that like U.S. propaganda would talk about China, the surveillance state. I mean, we've got that here. So I just think that would continue to be worse. You have like this trial in Dallas a couple of weeks ago where, people were accused of terrorism for handing out zines, things like that. To me, that's the bigger threat. It's this kind of dystopian stuff in the United States, not necessarily foreign invasion or wars or anything like that. Just kind of Minneapolis on steroids, Minneapolis writ large everywhere. It's my biggest fear.
Yeah. That has been my fear, actually.
Yeah.
That's seriously, I think
they're going to come after podcasters.
That's the next thing, right? Come after these people that are.
You're gonna have to get like a Groucho Marx mustache and pretend you're somebody else.
The compound down here in Baja might grow leaps and bounds.
There you go. We'll all be there. Yeah.
Well, as we see more people get in trouble, like facing real trouble, one of the things that surprised me the most, that I would assume would have every American up in arms, a la George Floyd, a la Rodney King, was not just the murders that we saw in Minneapolis, but it was the attempted murder of a school teacher. I don't know if you guys know the story of this one woman. I can't think of her name. She was
shot 5 times.
She was shot 5 times.
Oh, in Chicago. I thought it was Chicago, wasn't it? Or was it Minneapolis?
Yeah, it wasn't Minneapolis. It was Chicago. Yeah. When you see something like that happen, and she survives by the grace of someone's God, all because she did something benign. She followed an ICE agent, and they were like, "Fuck this." And it's because the people that are operating in metropolitan areas were able to operate like this on the border because you're doing it under the cover of nothingness. There is no one around at the southern border where these people kill with impunity. There's no one there taking stats of all the unnamed people that die. Mexico's not tracking the people that aren't showing up to collect their pensions, right? So when this happens, they're just anonymous nobodies. And these are the people that are now in the cities that really went there with no training whatsoever and looked at anyone not waving a flag as they went by as impending doom. And for the Democratic Party not to even rally behind that as like, maybe we should capitulate to one of these lefty demands and eliminate this thing that really isn't necessary. We have enough, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. And I feel it almost feels like people are like, well, it's not happening in my city, so I'm not really tripping. And that feels to me like the future domestically. I don't know what Kuba feels about that.
So the way that I see it, and I think you made a good pivot there. There's the way that the world looks like for Americans and the way that the world looks like on the global scale. And we had the super chat. Will the winged hussars come to the rescue? And maybe, Because if we think about how other states are reacting to this deterioration of global security, this emergence of a wide scale conflict and dislocation in the international economy, um, Mark Carney has laid out this idea of an alliance of middle powers, mostly democratic bourgeois republics, but not they're not all terrible, right? He is capable, and there are uh, people in positions of authority in Europe, in places across Asia, that have more technical skill, more understanding of statecraft and international economics, and a greater sense of responsibility, a notion that the future matters, um, in place where that see the dangers coming and want to prepare for it. Because some of them are young enough that they'll be here when the shit hits the fan. Some of them want to stay in power. There's all kinds of different motivations, but there seems to be an emerging playbook among these middle powers for some level of security and economic coordination, which might provide them with a soft landing in this extremely turbulent period. So you could end up with a situation in which those middle powers enjoy a relative degree of stability, especially since success tends to reinforce success, especially even in most notably in cases where you see the um, where the other course of action gets you, right? One reason why there is this mobilization to come up with an alternative to Trumpism is because everybody around the world sees what Trumpism has been doing to the United States and wants to avoid that. So I see that there's a possibility there that economic hard times actually produce more responsible and measured form of adjustment across the middle powers. This may be spoiled at some point by an American intervention into Canada or seizure of Greenland or something like that, but I can explain why I don't think that's the case a moment later. I think that China will likewise be able to, in a very different way, ride out the adjustment and shift so that it has a more sustainable economic direction. It's already the world leader in renewables. If it accelerates the shift from fossil fuels and will reduce dependency on the Middle East, that's advantageous to it. There's commercial advantages too to being the global leader in all of these new technologies. China's dark factories, China's AI, its software, it has a great deal of expertise and potential to deliver technological solutions to some of its adjustment problems. So I see another locus of stability potentially there. I see large scale disorder worldwide, um, especially in the greater Middle East. I think that Russia is much more fragile than it may look. It's done remarkably badly in Ukraine, and the more recent developments have advantaged Ukraine over Russia in ways that are actually quite striking. And one factor that we may be undervaluing is the extent to which a great power assimilating the warfighting doctrine, technology that comes out of the Ukrainian experience, Ukrainian technology, Ukrainian experts, Ukrainian tactics, might develop a significant advantage over other forces. It's a little like the difference between the blitzkrieg tactics of the Third Reich versus the staggered and combined infantry and armor of the French Republic, right? They both had the same technology. One side knew how to use it better, and that made all of the difference. I think the Ukrainians have the best drone tactics in the world, the best drone operations in the world. That's something that the Europeans and the Canadians, for instance, appreciate and want to assimilate as quickly as possible. While the United States, because of Pete Higgs' breath, I think is the term of choice,
Keg's breath. Yeah.
has disregarded. Uh, yeah. So um, I see Latin America, like if something can be done about both the pernicious influence of the United States and the dangers of cartel style states within states, you have some good leadership there. And the economic potential, the human capital, it's really, it's a tragedy and a crime that Mexico isn't as successful as Japan. It really has the bones for it. It could be operating that well, but through a combination of foreign meddling and the narcotics trade, it's been really held back. But we'll see. Maybe if the locus of conflict is entirely in the Middle East and along the Russian frontier, maybe that'll produce some breathing room for Latin America. But in the United States, I see the risks of exactly the sort of system that you're describing. And indeed, the head of Palantir, Karp is his name, right?
Yeah.
He has said that we basically need to do Chinese style surveillance state so the Chinese don't do one to us. But I think that they're not going to succeed. I think that this conflict in Iran is going to erode the foreign power, the power projection ability of the United States through things like the degradation of morale, the inability to replace aging weapon systems, the fact that one of the two aircraft carriers, the Gerald Ford, is out of commission because of a laundry fire and clogged toilets, which seems to me like that sounds a little like sabotage. And I don't mean Iranian sabotage. I mean demoralized sailors that think this war is bullshit, don't want to be stuck in the middle of the ocean, and would much rather have a little holiday in Crete. Um, and I think that you're going to see more and more of that, right? The Marine expeditionary units, I can't imagine that morale is particularly high when they look at the circumstances that they're going into and the reason for this conflict, the way this conflict has developed and initiated. So I think that and you don't have the shipbuilding capability that the United States had anymore. If the F-35 system is penetrated or broken down, then you end up with a very long lag time before you can again have technological superiority in the air. So I see this chipping away significantly at the American military advantage. And I also see the chickens coming home to roost in terms of the decline of the US economy and rolling crisis in the US. You're going to have high inflation, high energy prices at the exact same time that this war on immigrants is wiping out both um, key elements of your working class involved in food production, construction, other essential sectors, and through the suppression of student visas, the war on universities, the distaste of the white nationalists to H-1Bs and Asian immigrants, you're going after your innovators, you're going after your technical intelligentsia. The United States cannot produce its own scientists. Go to any university, go to the STEM departments. They're not Americans. They are immigrants. They've been for at least a generation, probably two. So you're alienating the people that you need to maintain your technological edge. And all of this is going to, the consequences are going to hit. And it's going to create a real shock to the internally to the system. I don't know who ends up on top, but in 5 to 10 years, the United States will be transformed.
I think one theme that we kind of ignore because of this idea of exceptionalism is that there are limits of power, and there always have been. And even at the end of the Cold War, when the U.S. controlled 50% of the global economy, there were limits to its power, and we saw that in places like Vietnam or wherever the nationalist movements in the Middle East, and that's clearly, I think, the case now, and we're seeing it abundantly. In especially Iran is it's a big country. It has a military, but it's holding the U.S. at bay right now, which is really quite striking. the point you made too about labor, I think, is really critical. I was a university professor for 30 years, and the engineering and pharmacy departments tended to be, for the most part, I think, students from places like India and China. So we're losing that kind of, skilled labor. And then Trump is kind of reveling at this. He's kind of glorifying ignorance. And it's gonna, it's gonna take a while to get over this. I think, we have the absence of any real political opposition at that level. I mean, the Democratic Party is useless. And even, the people who we kind of latched onto, Abu Ghazala or AOC, I mean, they toe the party line on things like NATO and Taiwan. So we don't really have an oppositional political culture, and that's why people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene have I think taken it on. So the future, I think here especially, economically is difficult. I don't pretend to know. I mean, I don't understand how the stock market is at 46,000 or whatever, considering, we're not really making stuff anymore. So it's, I feel for younger people. I mean, look what they've lived through, right? 9/11, global change, the recession of 2008, COVID. I think 50 years from now, when we write histories of this period, COVID is going to be such a huge element in all that,
Yes.
And we're gutting public health, which I think is something that it's not my field. I don't really understand it that well, but every time I read one of these stories, I get horrified by just the abandonment of any notion of any kind of public health system. So it's a fairly bleak picture out there. Last thing I'll say, which you brought up, is this idea of sabotage. I know in the Vietnam era, millions of soldiers got dishonorable discharges. And I think we're seeing that. I know that I follow like a lot of, there's groups like Vets for Peace and About Face. Their hotlines are getting flooded by active duty soldiers saying, how do I apply for CO status? What can I do? There's an increasingly growing movement in the military. And I would think if you try to send these young men into, like Iran, I just think that would be, it's incomprehensible to me that they would do that. And apparently a lot of these hotlines are saying, like, people are saying two things. One, we don't want to fight for Israel. Two, apparently that strike on the girls' school really hit them. Like, we're not here to do that. And so, we do have this kind of makings. We've often, people on the left have fantasized about revolution. The problem now is the revolution is like Nick Fuentes, right? So I don't know. It's a fairly bleak prospect, but this has been great. What you said is just, I've learned quite a bit just today from it. So,
well, Bob, thank you for joining us. Kuba, thank you as always for your depressing insights.
It's been a delight, Bob. Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching. Again, the show will be back tomorrow morning at its regular time, 9 a.m. Pacific. M. Tucson will be leading it, as I will not be on air. I would love to say I'm off, but I have writing projects to complete. Again, thank you, Bob. Wherever you guys are watching or listening, there's a link in the description to Bob's show, the Green and Red Podcast. Please check that out. Kuba, as always, you're the bomb.
The neutron bomb.
Thank you.
Neutron bomb.
It's
Let's go out with some 80s cartoons. Peace.